Hey everybody, what an honor to be here. Thank you guys so much. I guess you guys all heard that they found the joke about how they found a cure for COVID right here. It's a riot, right? In Minneapolis. 1 second you are a murderer for going out of your house, and the next second, if you don't go out of your house, you're a racist because we have to protest, right? True story. Absolutely crazy. Another joke while we get the presentation up. Socialism. And if you're from Cuba or Venezuela, please don't spoil the joke because you already know. But what did socialists and communists use for lighting before candles? Light bulbs and electricity in the good old days before communism and socialism. So, yeah, it's true. If I had $1 for every time socialism worked, I'd have $0. But unfortunately, we are headed now, guys, very rapidly in that direction. Let's see. There we go. If you look at the polling data, my generation, millennials, and it's always very embarrassing to admit that you're a millennial because then everybody just assumes you're an idiot, and it's not entirely unjustified. But my generation, we are now 70% say that we will vote for socialists. This was a poll released in 2019 by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. So all these other battles that we're fighting, they're all going to be for nothing if we don't deal with this crisis. And the next generation after us, it's even worse. If you look at the religious data, it's even more terrifying. Millennials will be the first generation in all of American history where self-described Christians are in the minority. Okay, the next generation is going to be even worse. This is all deliberate. It's all by design. And so as Christianity goes out the door, what's coming in? Well, just a couple weeks ago in California, the State Board of Education voted unanimously for this new ethnic studies model curriculum. And it sounds like you guys have something similar coming to Minnesota. And among other joys, you'll find that the children in elementary school will be chanting to the demon gods of the Aztecs, the gods of human sacrifice and cannibalism, for help becoming warriors for social justice. True story. It's right there in the ethnic studies curriculum. The guy who wrote this actually wrote in a book that we should pray to these Aztec gods of human sacrifice and cannibalism for help waging a counter-genocide against Christians. Okay? And all that sounds totally crazy, and it should. But what happens when the next generation grows up believing this stuff? Well, very bad things. A big part of the ethnic studies curriculum is, of course, the critical race theory. And I just published a column on this in the Epoch Times. I interviewed a lady who had grown up in China under Chairman Mao. And wonderful lady. I serve on a board with her. Her name is Lily Tang Williams. I encourage you to go look at that article. What she told me was absolutely terrifying. She said that this is exactly what she saw in China under Mao when she was a little girl in an indoctrination center masquerading as a public school. She said they divided the people up into two categories. They had the black classes and the red classes. The black classes were the evil ones. They were the ones who came from a family that might have had land or a business or property of some sort. Conservatives, Christians also fell in that class. And it was something that you were born with. You couldn't get rid of it. Even with all the self-criticism in the world, even if you turned in your parents to the Communist Party, it was just part of who you were. It's your identity. The other class, the red classes, that was the revolutionary soldiers, the communists, the landless peasants, and so on. So, it didn't happen right away, but give a few years of this kind of indoctrination, what happened? Very soon, tens of millions of people were slaughtered. That's how serious the stakes are, guys. They're not doing this for nothing. They know exactly what they're doing. Now, there's some good news with this whole COVID pandemic, and I'll touch on that before we leave here tonight. Massive exodus from the public school system, massive increase in homeschooling, and we can praise God for that. It's wonderful news. Now, Kimberly stole my thunder here a little bit, and I'm glad she did. Totalitarians throughout the 20th century have understood that the way to total power is by grabbing the minds of the young. And this is a real quote by Hitler. You know, you see so many of the fake quotes. This one came up at the Nuremberg trials. Said that he alone who owns the youth gains the future. And so what he did, he set out deliberately to drive a wedge in families, separate children from their parents, get all the children into the Hitler Youth, and get them in the government. He was actually the first world leader in human history to make it a crime to educate your own children at home. And after all the denazification, that's one of the laws that they kept on the books. You still couldn't homeschool your kids in Germany, and you still can't to this day. But I want to show you that the same exact tactics are now coming to America, and it's not happening in the shadows anymore. They're telling you on national television. So here's Melissa Harris Perry on SLSD.
Never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
All right, there you go. They're telling you on national TV. Okay, your kids don't belong to you; they belong to everybody. Okay, we're going to have collective child rearing, and this, of course, has been the policy of the federal government for quite some time. These came out during the final years of the Obama administration, U.S. Department of Education, and Health and Human Services. You can read this yourself. I found it on the Health and Human Services website. They said parents get to be equal partners with the federal government in the raising of their own children. But then as you read into the report, you see they don't even mean equal partners. You get to be the junior partner. They get to tell you what to do. And if you don't obey, then you need parenting lessons from the other partner. And if you don't accept those parenting lessons, then we need a more serious intervention like taking your kids from you. Okay? Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education for 7 years under Obama. Here he is talking about this crazy stuff.
There's certain kids we should have 24/7 to really create a safe environment and give them a chance. I think all of our schools should be community centers. Our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of after school.
All right, so if we don't have your kids 24/7, we at least need to make all the schools community centers so that we can have your kids 12, 13, 14 hours a day with lots of programming, okay? That's where they're going. Now, Hillary Clinton has been sounding this drum for decades. It takes a village to raise your children, and if you've read the book, you know it takes a government village to raise the children, not the normal village. And then here's the product of the village raising our children, right? These two geniuses here, the girl there with the shaved head, she actually was running around with a communist Cuban patch on her militia jacket. And I don't know if you guys remember the story. That's from my state in Florida, but somebody shot up the school, and the kids decided they knew better than the parents. Actually, this one guy here, David Hogg, went on TV. He said, our parents don't know how to use it. Blank democracy. Okay, wait till we take over. We're going to take all the guns, and then we won't have school shootings anymore. Right? Yeah, in the 1930s, a 7-year-old could order a fully automatic machine gun from the Sears catalog. Guess how many school shootings they had? None. Okay, right. So obviously the availability of guns is not the problem. What they're teaching the children is the problem. And they do have an agenda. I want to show you that agenda before we get into the specifics of what they're doing. I think a lot of you are familiar with this, but instead of telling you, I'll just let them speak in their own words. It's a bipartisan problem, so I've got representative samples from both parties.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founder.
When we are successful, and we will be, how can you be so sure they're going to be successful? Well, it's because they got your kids, right? And I'm going to show you that they've been bragging about this for a while. If you actually dig down into what he's saying, it should terrify you, right? He's talking about the UN's peacekeeping role. He means their military forces, those famous blue helmets that are known for raping children all over the world. True story. They're going to use these peacekeeping forces to bring about the vision of the UN's founders. Well, on the one side of the table, after World War II, we had Mr. Molotov, Stalin's delegate, the guy who negotiated that deal with Hitler where they were going to carve up and enslave Europe. Yeah, great guy they sent. And then on our side, at least we had a guy there, Alger Hiss, we sent. And somebody knows, okay? They kind of wiped him out of the history books because it was bad publicity. But they really liked this guy. I mean, they liked him so much they made him the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the UN. And then we threw him in federal prison because we found out he was working for Joseph Stalin all along. So that's the vision of the UN's founders. Frankly, I think our founders had a pretty good vision. God gave us rights. God created us equally. We set up a government to create and protect these rights. Well, that was a good idea. Not so much the UN's vision.
Back in 1989, President Bush said, and it was a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
Yep, and China Joe, and I could do this all week, but you get the point.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
Yeah, okay, so they all agree we need a new world order, right? They've got all kinds of international agreements. They're moving us in this direction. And if you really want to understand, I can really summarize the whole program for you very quickly, and you can test it on every issue, and you'll see it works the same. Just take everything the Bible teaches, flip it exactly upside down, and then you see where they're coming from. Okay, God ordained private property. He said, "Thou shalt not steal." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. So they said, we got to steal everything. We got to just redistribute all the private property. show you later. God created the male and female. Right? Until a few years ago, that would not have been that controversial. You don't need to be a Bible scholar to recognize biology. But now they teach the kids that that's bigotry. Okay, God ordained that there should be nation states. God created the nations. It says repeatedly God created the nations. He was upset after the Tower of Babel. So what do they say? That nations are racist. Borders are racist. We have to have just one big, happy global family. And on every issue, you'll see they come down on the same side. That is the opposite of what the Bible teaches. They also brag about their strategy. And the reason we're talking about the UN is because they're so open about it. So this is Agenda 21.
On the importance of economic instruments and free markets were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear.
So I show that because, CNN will say Agenda 21 is a conspiracy theory. Well, there's the guy who signed it. Every government on the planet signed it, and they're talking about it. But it's a conspiracy theory. And it's a bipartisan problem. Here's the leader of the Communist Party in Congress.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. H. Congress 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21.
And you guys get the point, right? So Agenda 21 is pretty significant. Every government on the planet signed up, and according to the creators of Agenda 21, it is intended to be implemented by every person on the planet. No exemption for homeschoolers in Minnesota, sorry. Also, it will require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. You'd think with something that big, they might have asked us, but no. But now, how are they going to get this, right? That's the $50 million question. They call us the bitter clingers. We cling to our guns and we cling to our Bibles, and what are we going to do, those clingy Americans? Okay. Well, they tell you what they're going to do. Go to chapter 36 of Agenda 21, and it's spelled out in plain English the entirety of their strategy. Education is going to be critical for sustainable development. It's going to be indispensable, is the term they used. Indispensable to changing people's attitudes. They say it's critical for achieving the right attitudes and values consistent with sustainable development. This is their language from their agreement that every government on planet Earth signed. They said it's got to include spiritual development. We'll come back to that. They don't mean the Ten Commandments. And it's got to be integrated into all disciplines. It's got to bombard them from all sides. Okay. This is the Agenda 21 book for children. I've got a copy at home. It was produced by UNESCO. You should read it. It's an abomination. Right at the beginning, they've got a quote by Al Gore about, we need to set up a global monitoring network staffed by children to save the planet. Okay. But you remember what I said about the rule, everything the Bible teaches, flip it upside down? All right. Well, here's one of the pictures in there. You see the deities. They're up there sitting on the clouds, and they're very upset because the storks are delivering all these babies. And like, what's going on here? Why all these babies? And then on the next page, you find out why the deities are so upset. Okay, it says actually right there in plain English, it's on page 41, the earth groans every time it registers another birth. Okay, what does the Bible say? It says to be fruitful and multiply. It says children are a blessing. So what do they teach your children? That Mother Earth is groaning every time a new baby arrives. Right? And all these people wonder, why won't I ever get grandchildren? It's because your children are being force-fed this garbage. And they have been for generations. Now, I've been following the UN clown show around the world for the last decade. I went down to Rio de Janeiro in 2012 for their UN conference on sustainable development. And they had all these little kids drawing these pretty posters. I took a picture of one you can see there. And maybe you can't see it, but it's the Earth, and the Earth looks very sick. And the doctor diagnoses the problem. You have humans. Okay? Humans, you're the disease on this planet. This is what they're teaching your children. Okay? Obviously, the conference was chaired by a Chinese communist, Xia Zhekung. And now, more recently, in 2015, they came up with the new and improved Sustainable Development Roadmap for the world. It's called Agenda 2030, or the Sustainable Development Goals. They've got 17 of them. And in the preamble, they say that your children are critical agents of change. They're going to use these new goals to build a better world. Isn't that cute? Because we all want a better world, right? But what does the UN mean by better world? Well, read the text. Go down to goal number 10 as an example. Okay? They say we've got to reduce inequality within and among countries. So it's not enough to just have national socialism anymore. Now we need global socialism, international wealth redistribution. They say it's only going to be possible if the wealth is shared and the income inequality is addressed. Now, where have we heard that before? Oh, yeah, Stalin, Lenin, Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, and the list goes on. Right? We've heard this exact same rhetoric before. Where did this rhetoric come from in the UN agreement? We don't have to speculate. The Communist Chinese, as soon as it was approved by every government on planet Earth, they put out press releases in all of their propaganda media. They said, we played a crucial role in developing Agenda 2030. So is it surprising that it calls for international communism? Well, what's their strategy? They still got to deal with us bitter clingers. I'm glad you asked. In goal number 4, they tell you, okay, your children are the strategy. They say that by 2030, all learners, again, no exemption for homeschoolers in Minnesota, sorry guys, all learners must have the knowledge and skills not just necessary to submit to this, not just to passively accept it. They need to be so brainwashed, they will promote it. Okay? That's where they're coming from. And they're telling you. And they're producing propaganda. I pulled this right off the UN's YouTube channel. Watch.
We achieve sustainable development that protects our planet and builds a more inclusive, equal, and peaceful world without education. We can't. Sustainable development begins with education.
It begins with education.
Put global education first.
There you go. Produced by UNESCO, the UN's education agency. It begins with education. Okay? That's what they are telling us. It's not my opinion that they're going to brainwash our children to bring about this plan. It's them bragging about it in the open. They're just not telling us in the fake media. Now, I want to show you how this works, because they actually have a lot of practice. They've been doing this for a long time, and they are incredibly effective at changing the values of your children. Back in the early 1990s, if you had told people that within a generation or two we'd have homosexual marriages, you would have been laughed out of the room. They might have called the guys with the white lab coats to take you away to a rubber room. Right? It just was not on anybody's radar. It was completely crazy. Sodomy was still a crime across most of the United States. Homosexual marriage, that's ridiculous. Well, I'm going to show you what they were teaching your children. In first grade, second grade, and third grade, this was early 1990s in America, they had this documentary produced by some homosexuals called It's Elementary, talking about gay issues at school. Okay, they were thinking ahead, unlike us, unfortunately. But here's an excerpt from the documentary.
Let me tell you quickly the background. Today, the law says that if you're the same sex, 2 men and 2 women, you can't get married. It is against the law. And I thought that it might be kind of fun for us to sort of be pretend judges for a few minutes. What I'm going to give you is a sheet that just tells you that some people think that it's wrong for gays to get married, that it's not natural,
Those
that
are bad
it goes
people
against
with bad
what family
arguments.
is. Other people think that the state should not decide these things, that it should just be up to 2 adults to decide what they want to do. What do you think the answer to these questions are? Should gays be allowed to marry? Should they not?
And then you get the peer pressure, 5 minutes of all the kids. Oh yeah, how mean that we don't let loving people get married, right? And so parents are thinking, oh, sodomy is a crime. We don't have anything to worry about. Well, they were preparing your children, and then what happened? 30 years later, the pretend judges on our Supreme Court struck down marriage laws in all 50 states. I mean, they couldn't even get this passed in California, right? The land of fruits and nuts. You guys want a homosexual marriage? No thanks. But the pretend judges on the Supreme Court can do it, and the young people were already prepared, right? Now, we're here, right? The Drag Queen Story Hour, obviously that's a guy wearing a dress and some demon horns, so you know where it came from. Straight from the pit of hell, obviously. And then here, the school teachers marching in the Pride Parade. Here they're walking their dogs, goodness gracious. Now we're at the point where ABC Fake News, one of the big mainstream networks, they've got drag children on TV. Okay, all of this was made possible by the brainwashing in the government schools. In the interest of time, we'll skip some of the videos, but the reason I bring the videos, by the way, is because I don't expect anybody to believe this stuff unless I bring the receipts, because it's crazy, it's horrible, it's evil, and so I don't want you guys to take my word for it. I want you to see them speaking in their own words. Now, they were very successful in training our children that the pretend judges should strike down our marriage laws. Well, I'm going to show you now what they're teaching. It's one of many things, but the significance of this is hard to overstate. When we were younger, at least when I was younger, I learned that carbon dioxide was the gas of life. Humans exhale about 2 pounds of it every single day. Plants use it for photosynthesis. It's just this beautiful cycle. Well, not anymore. Now they teach children that carbon dioxide is this horrible, dangerous, evil, toxic pollution, and we can only save ourselves from this horrible, toxic pollution by giving taxes to the United Nations. And that sounds absolutely bonkers. It's insane. And yet, if you teach it to a kindergartner and mom and dad said, listen to the teacher, they'll believe it, right? So here's what it looks like in a government class.
You've heard the reports. The globe's warming. It's our fault, and the consequences will be terrible. Children are frightened.
I worry. My mom worries. The water might rise and it might flood the whole town.
We won't be able to survive for long. What are you most worried will happen?
We'll all die.
Are there some people who say this isn't true?
Yes.
Might they be right?
No.
How do you know they're not right?
Well, because the Earth is getting hotter.
Where do you learn them?
It's like a Newman saying, right? Don't drink the Kool-Aid. But actually, it's public school in Florida.
What are the main components after educating the students of global warming is that they're given a letter for their families to sign, and it's to the congressman or woman.
A letter for their after you educate them, you give them letters for their congressmen, okay? See what they're doing, guys? They're weaponizing your kids against you. Now, from a scientific point of view, this is absolutely ludicrous. I've interviewed dozens of scientists, including the UN's own scientists. They'll tell you it's garbage. I interviewed Trump's climate advisor, Dr. William Happer. He says the planet is starving for more CO2. That's why farmers pump it into their greenhouse. He said plants were designed to live in an environment with 4 to 5 times as much CO2. But they're teaching your kids that CO2 is a toxic pollution, and that unless we pay the UN taxes, we're all doomed. Okay? This, from a totalitarian perspective, is critical. There's nothing you can do that doesn't produce CO2, and I mean nothing. You can't eat, you can't breathe, you can't sleep, you can't even die without emitting CO2. And if you accept the notion that CO2 is pollution, everything you do is polluting, and therefore everything you do needs to fall under the jurisdiction and the taxation of government and the United Nations.
You think the purpose of education
here's the purpose of
reading,
school.
writing, and arithmetic. The purpose of education.
And actually, I should stop here. Charlotte Iserbyt, she's become a good friend of mine. She was Ronald Reagan's senior advisor on education until she figured out what was going on at the Department of Education. She said they were merging the U.S. and Soviet educational systems. She started leaking the documents to the press. Obviously, she didn't last very long there. But here she says, what's the purpose of education? And she'll explain to you. We think it's reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, listen to what she says.
You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students.
Yeah, and don't take her word for it, because she was opposed to this. Now I'm going to show you Shirley McCoon. She was writing national standards before almost anybody knew we were going to have national standards. Okay, she was with a contract with the Department of Education. Here she is speaking to the 50 state governors at a conference convened by George H.W. Bush. Listen carefully to what she says.
Fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society. What is happening in America today and what is happening in Kansas and the Great Plains is not simply a chance situation in the usual winds of change. What it amounts to is a total transformation of our society. We have moved into a new era.
Total transformation of our society. Okay, total restructuring, she calls it. Now listen to the role of the schools. Okay, she was the one designing the national standards. Listen to what she says about how they're going to make this happen.
The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is.
They use their crystal ball for that.
And then move back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of school.
Huh. How many parents do you think send their kids off to school thinking there's a social change function of schools? Probably not a lot, right? Now, this lady is an absolute wackadoodle of the highest order, and we'll come back to this. She co-wrote a book called The Light Shall Set You Free, and they talk about how they're communicating with these spiritual entities. They call them ascended masters. So just to give you an idea of where she's coming from, right? And we'll come back to that. Now, what does this fundamental transformation look like? What does this social change function look like? Well, we see it in the gender and the sexuality madness at a school in Florida. A little girl decided she was a little boy, so the school right away said, hey, go shower and change and go to the bathroom with the boys, honey. And by the way, Mr. PE teacher, you have to go in and supervise all this because that's your job. You got to go supervise the boys' locker room. And he said, well, I can't do that. You know, like last week, that was a crime, and I would have gone to jail for watching an underage girl get naked. Well, you got to. Well, I can't do that. Well, not only are we going to fire you, we're going to take away your teaching credentials, so you will never teach again in the state of Florida. We pried the emails loose. They said, we got to make an example of this guy so that he will not inspire anybody else to resist. Here in Minnesota, that equal partnership, you guys remember, right? Probably most of you have heard this story, but there was a boy who decided he was a girl, And mom said, no, sorry, son, forget it. Nope. Well, the equal partner in this relationship knew better, and so they took this child to a medical facility, and I use that term very loosely, and had his genitals surgically removed. Okay, part of what they call a sex change surgery. And this ended up in federal court, and guess what? All the federal court cases in the world will not result in the reattachment of the private parts that are gone. This came from California, which is kind of at the forefront of the madness. I pulled this right off their Department of Education website. They've got a gender transition plan and an individual transition plan. And the kids can download this. They fill out the form. What's your preferred pronouns? What gender are you? Do your parents know? What name should we call you? If your parents don't know, we'll help conceal this from, and we'll help get you ready for your hormone treatments, your surgeries, whatever's going to come. These are for kids, guys, in total violation of their parents' parental rights. Okay, for 5-year-olds, they had in their health education framework this book here, Who Are You? That teaches there are infinite genders. You can be agender, bigender, trigender, neutral, free spirits, things I can't even pronounce. And if you disagree, you're a bigot and a hater. Okay, this is what they have for teens in middle school. You can't even talk about some of the things here in polite company. It's so horrifying. This is something that was sent out by the National Education Association, the largest teachers union in America, the largest union of any kind in America, more than 3 million members. And listen to what they say. They teamed up with the Human Rights Campaign, the most vicious LGBT group in America, the ones that want to pass the Equality Act to take down churches that won't bow the knee. Listen to what they sent to their teachers.
Hi, your name is Emma, correct? And my name is Z. What pronouns do you use?
I use she, they, them. What pronouns do you use?
I use they, them, and also just Z. And so instead of being a boy or a girl or something undefined or in the middle, I kind of like, just use my name. You know, my name is Z. So if you just use Z instead of a pronoun, it's like more personalized and like less fitting into a binary.
Yeah. And now, what do your teachers think about it? Do your teachers know to ask you your pronouns?
You said it's cool when teachers ask pronouns? That was never a thing. When I was like in elementary school or even middle school, did you find that you had to like ask for that or like even educate your teachers?
Well, when I had a substitute, sometimes I had to.
Okay, only when you have the substitute. It's so entrenched now that even the teachers all know you got to ask the kids pronouns. Okay, they are facilitating this madness, and it's very, very effective, folks. I went to school in the 90s. And I lived in 8 countries on 4 continents. I met thousands of kids from every conceivable background, religion, race, country, whatever, anything you can imagine. Okay, I never once in my whole childhood met a boy who thought he was a girl. I never once met a girl who thought she was a boy, much less something in between or undefined, right? Never. The word transgender wasn't in the dictionary when I was a kid. Okay? Well, today, this study out of the University of California at Los Angeles, this just came out 2 years ago, they found in their survey that 27% of the children ages 12 through 17 were now self-identified as gender nonconforming. So, maybe not a boy, not a girl, something in between, something else. 27%. Okay, you think that all happened in less than a generation without some sort of outside intervention? Of course not, right? I live in a conservative school district. This is not a problem where I live. Well, I was in Utah giving some talks on this, and I had the opportunity to meet some of their state school board members and some of their policymakers there, and they gave me this data. It came out of the state database on medical prescriptions. And what they told me and what they showed me with the data was that there had been, in the state of Utah, one of the most conservative states in America, a 10,000% increase in 5 years in the number of underage children going through what they call medical transitions. So they're injecting testosterone into little girls, they're injecting puberty blockers into the kids, estrogen, preparing them to mutilate their genitals. Okay, 10,000% increase in 5 years in one of the most conservative states in this country. It's everywhere, folks. There's no place in America left where the public school system is safe. And it gets worse, if you can believe it. Okay, the final frontier, the last taboo, you don't touch the kids. Well, that's coming down too. Okay, this was sent to me by a concerned mom in California. She found out they passed that mandatory LGBT history indoctrination program, and she sent me the slideshow that they were using in the classroom about the history of the LGBT stuff. They start with Harvey Milk, the pervert who raped multiple children, some of whom went on to go kill themselves, and he started the LGBT revolution. Well, as they go on, they start teaching the kids about ancient Greece and how the men there used to have lots of sex with boys, and it was totally normal and no big deal. Okay? And so she says to the assistant superintendent for curricula, the person responsible for overseeing all this, why are you teaching my kids pedophilia? What's wrong with you? Okay, listen carefully to the answer that she gives. different types of sexual orientations. Different types of sexual orientation, right? Do the math, guys. Okay? It is now against the law, thanks to the Supreme Court in every state, to discriminate based on someone's sexual orientation. And they're teaching the children that raping children is just a different sexual orientation. So we recognize that it would be insane to put a pedophile in charge of the Sunday school ministry. But what happens when these kids get out? And then you're discriminating against someone based on their sexual orientation. Hey, do you see where this goes? Do you see how they plan in advance and prepare? It wasn't an isolated incident. Here's another school in California. Pedophilia as sexual orientation. Yeah, they're going there. And if we don't do something, that's what's coming. Okay. Now, the UNESCO, Kimberly touched on this a little bit, the UN's Education Agency, they are full on out of the closet. This was an international technical guidance on sex education. They want to teach 5-year-olds about masturbation. They want 9-year-olds to be able to defend legal murder of babies. Okay, and it gets worse from there. And it all goes back to this guy here. We were talking about Dr. Judith Reisman, may she rest in peace. She was the one who exposed all of this. It all goes back to Alfred Kinsey, the pervert, pedophile, responsible for the rape and sexual torture of hundreds, maybe thousands of little children under the guise of science. Okay, she actually pulled out the charts from his books, table 31, 32, 33, and 34. They meticulously documented they were raping babies. Okay, babies younger than a year old. And they would rape them and sexually torture them for an entire day. And they'd say, look, they're screaming and passing out. That must be a climax. This means children are sexual beings from the time they're born, and we need to get them sexualized and get them ready for sex the second we can get our hands on them. And I'm sorry to have to explain that to you, but it all goes back to this sicko. And it was all pseudoscience. It was all a lie. And yet, this is the foundation for the sex education that now absolutely permeates our education system. And if that makes you want to throw up, good. You're still a normal human being. Praise God. Now, we get the idea that our kids are still going there to learn how to read, write, and do math. Baloney. And you don't have to take my word for it, okay? The Common Core standards, they put 2 subject matter experts on the commission, the validation commission, hand-picked people who would say, yeah, these are good standards, let's use them. 2 subject matter experts, one in English, one in math. They both refused to sign off. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, she said these are written hastily by people who didn't care how poorly written they were. It's going to reduce the ability of children to think critically. We're taking out all the great literature. I'm not signing off on that. The only math expert, Dr. Milgram from Stanford University, said, look, these are as non-challenging as possible. They have extremely serious failings. There are actual errors in the math. And so we better mandate them in all 50 states quickly. Okay? He also refused to sign on. Now, the federal government knows this is making your children dumber and dumber. They funded a study through an organization called CSAIL, and they found, and I'm quoting, significant negative effects during the 7 years in which the new standards were in place. The magnitude of these negative effects got bigger over time. They've also got national science standards. I call them national pseudoscience standards. They're not in every state yet, but they're coming, and this is all you need to know. 12 years of pseudoscience education, you will never hear the term scientific method. I wonder why. Because then maybe the kids would know that all the gender madness and the climate insanity is baloney, right? So they don't want the kids to know real science. They've got fake history. They're teaching kids that America invented slavery, that America is the most evil nation in history. The Second Amendment so the government can have a military force. You've got the 1619 Project, total fake history. You've got the People's History of the United States, the most popular school history book in America by a member of the Communist Party. Okay, Howard Zinn. Now, as for academics, again, don't believe me. This is what the federal government itself is telling you. This is their data. This came out in 2019. The National Assessment of Educational Progress. Less than 1/3 of 8th graders was proficient in math. And by proficient, they don't mean good at. The standards are so dumbed down. I mean, if your first grader couldn't do those, you should be ashamed. By the time they get to be high school seniors, less than 1/4 are proficient in math. Less than 1/3 are proficient in reading. Okay? $20,000 a year, 14 years, they can't even read their high school diploma. Isn't that cute? Here's the Undersecretary of Education.
The National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, which is called America's Report Card, reports that 2/3, get this, 2/3 of American 8th graders are not proficient in any core subject.
Think about this as applied to any other industry or business. Imagine like a roofing company, and less than 1/3 of the roofs that they were building were actually working as roofs. I mean, that guy would be in court so fast your head would spin. Right? Think of a hamburger joint. They say, oh, just give me money and I'll give you a hamburger. And then you open it up and it's like a big rat. Right? They would not be in business for very long. And yet what do they say? Oh, just give us more money. What? Really? So what are they doing in class? Well, they're going to field trips to mosques, right? They got the 5 pillars of Islam on the wall in Kansas. Notice there's no 10 commandments. That would bring a lawsuit. They got mindfulness education, which is just Buddhism. The Buddhists will tell you this, and the mindfulness people will tell you this. It's Buddhism. You can have Buddhism in the classroom. You can also have yoga in the classroom, which is, of course, Hinduism. You can have, you can summon ancestor spirits. This is National Black Lives Matter training for teachers. Okay, here they are teaching teachers to teach children to summon ancestor spirits in the classroom.
And I'm going to ask you to hold an ancestor in your head right now. Ancestors watching, I know they're watching. Ancestors watching, I know. Now call out your ancestors into the room. Loud so we can hear you. Elevate them. It only took us 5 minutes to shift the energy in this space together.
All right, little kids, today we're going to summon ancestor spirits. Sorry, guys, but don't even mention those 10 commandments. The ACLU might come around. Right? So how do they get rid of Christian privilege? This is a U.S. Department of Education document. How do we get rid of Christian privilege in the schools? So U.S. Department of Education document, well, we can infuse the curriculum with traditions and intellectual traditions that originate in the Muslim world. That's cute. In North Carolina, this was years ago, they forced all the Christian kids to stand up in front of the classroom and apologize for their Christian privilege. True story. And now the data gathering, right? This is mind-blowing. So these I pulled right out of U.S. Department of Education reports. We'll focus on the facial expression camera. You can read this document yourself. This came out in 2013. They say that this camera monitors the facial expressions that students make when they're exposed to different stimuli. Like, maybe hypothetically a guy with the demon horns and a dress comes in and says, hey, boys and girls, we're going to learn about transgenderism today. And your kid makes a face. What? That's not good. Aha, this one needs an intervention. So the computer and the algorithm will tell you, all right, we got to circle back to get this one because he's got the wrong attitudes. Okay, that's what they're doing. They are gathering hundreds of data points on every child. What are they doing with all this data? Well, for one, they're manipulating their attitudes, values, beliefs, and behavior, and they're bragging about it. Social emotional learning, that's all it is, folks. And interesting, I wrote an article about this in the Epic Times. You can read it. I think I'm the one who discovered this and publicized it, but it's right there on the CASEL website, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And what they say is these ideas originated at the Fetzer Institute. So I quickly looked up the Fetzer Institute. Turns out it's run by a New Age guru who was a big fan of Alice Bailey. We'll come back to her. She was in communication with spiritual entities, and education was their big thing. So we'll come back to all that. Now, what are they doing with all this data? Well, they say that the big data captured from users' online behaviors is going to enable the algorithms to infer the user's knowledge, intentions, and interests. And here's the kicker. To create models for predicting their future behavior and interests. Okay? That's where they're going with this. Now it's being supercharged thanks to the coronavirus. Everything now has moved online. They are gathering every little bit of data. It's being stored permanently. They're creating files on your children. They know more about them than you do. They've got their mental health, their dental health, their nutrition, their attitudes, their family's attitudes, what kind of food you have in the fridge, how daddy talks to mommy. Does anybody in the home smoke or drink? All of it is being vacuumed up for Big Brother. Now, part of this, they're moving toward what they call a Great Reset. And this guy here, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, has been very vocal about what education means for the Great Reset. You should read his books. They are absolutely terrifying. And he says that the Great Reset is going to be engineered through the education system. He talks about it extensively in his book, COVID and the Great Reset. Okay? Here he is talking about a big part of the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Okay, it sounds like science fiction, but these people are bragging about it. And by the way, when he made the announcement about the Great Reset, he had the head of the United Nations, the head of the International Monetary Fund, and the heir to the British throne right there on stage with him. Okay, here's what he said.
It's at the end, what the Fourth Industrial Revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
The fusion of our physical and our digital identities. Okay, and as you read his books, the stuff gets so weird. He's talking about putting microchips fusing them with the brains of people, and it gets way creepier than that. And that's where they're going, folks. That's what they're talking about. Now, here's another part of the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum, and they're making predictions about what's coming. This one's interesting. The very first one, by 2030, you will own nothing, but you'll be happy. Okay? So we'll leave it at that. But that's where they're going, folks, and they know they got to prepare the children for it. So who owns nothing? Slaves, prisoners, serfs, and cattle. Okay? Take your pick. None of those are good options. Now, part of the way they do this, and I remember this as a child, and it was very traumatic, they call it values clarification. They've been doing this in the schools since the 60s. They know it's very effective. One of the guys who was involved in the development of this, Benjamin Bloom, he bragged that in 1 hour they could undo everything that parents had tried to do over 16 years. Okay? And the way they did, I'll just show you how they did it to me. And I remember this like it was yesterday. They said, all right, so you're on a ship, and the ship is sinking, and you're all going to jump off into the life raft, and there's only space for 10 of you, but there's 11 in there. And so now you've got to find out a little bit about each of the people in the life raft. So you've got a doctor and a teacher, and you better not pick the teacher or you'll flunk the exercise. You've got a lawyer, and you've got a surgeon. And so who are you going to throw overboard? Who are you going to murder for the sake of the collective, for the greater good? And of course, the correct answer is lawyer, obviously. I'm just kidding. I know there's even great lawyers in here. But so if the kids would put on their thinking caps, they'd say, well, we don't have to murder anybody. Like, let's just take turns. I'll swim next to the raft for 30 minutes, and when I get tired, we'll rotate, and then we don't have to kill anybody. But what are the kids supposed to think? Well, Mom and Dad said we shouldn't murder, the pastor said we shouldn't murder, and the Bible said we shouldn't murder. They were all wrong. Clearly, there's a time and a place to murder people. It just depends on the situation. So ethics and morality become relative. And what happens? It shatters a child's understanding of right and wrong. It shatters a child's trust in their parents and in their pastors and in their Bibles. And it completely changes their worldview in a matter of moments. Okay? It is devastating to little kids. They grew up hearing from Mom and Dad that there's right and wrong, that you shouldn't murder, and suddenly that's not true anymore. Okay? That's how effective this exercise is. That's why the vast majority of people in America today, and especially young people, don't even believe there is an objective right and an objective wrong. This was strategic. It was engineered. Now, back in the 80s, even before I was born, the Ronald Reagan administration put together a commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education, and they found, these are from their report, that our very future as a nation and as a people is under threat as a result of this baloney we call our education system. They said if a foreign power had done it to us, we might have viewed it as an act of war. And I think we should view it as an act of war. It was. It just wasn't necessarily foreigners responsible for it. But it wasn't always like this, right? Long before we had a government education system, we had the best educated people on planet Earth, bar none. Okay? John Adams wrote a letter to his friend, a native of America who can't read or write is as rare as a comet or an earthquake. You might see one from time to time, but they're very rare. Right? Go read the Federalist Papers. These are written for average, normal people, farmers, shopkeepers, blacksmiths, shoemakers. Right? And go find a college student today who can read them even in modern English. It just goes right over their heads. Right? They're incapable of comprehending it. This was a study published in 1812 by DuPont de Nemours on literacy in America. He found that not more than 4 in 1,000 young people were unable to write legibly, even neatly. Okay, I'll confess, I can't write legibly, much less neatly. And I think you struggle to find 4 out of 1,000 young people today who could write legibly and neatly. And yet back then, before we had this government school system, that was the data. Okay, Alexis de Tocqueville, who she mentioned, he had phenomenal things to say about our education system. He said in Connecticut and Massachusetts, it's rare to find a man imperfectly acquainted with the evidences of his religion, the history of his country, the leading features of its constitution. A man wholly ignorant of them is a sort of phenomenon. Right? Today it's exactly the opposite. If you find somebody who's acquainted with the evidences of their Christian religion and the features of our Constitution, that's the phenomenon. Right? How did we get here? Well, in 1776, we had schools all over America teaching all kinds of great things. A school for every interest. Poor children could go to church schools for free. We had a free market in education. And then this guy came along, Robert Owen, a communist before Karl Marx, and he decided, he actually started a communist commune in Indiana called New Harmony, and it was a total failure, as you might imagine, after less than 2 years. But he figured out the real problem was that the government didn't educate the children. That's why communism didn't work. So he put together these essays on why government should run education. Long story short, they were picked up by a Prussian ambassador. He took them back to the Prussian dictator, and the Prussian dictator said, this is a nice idea. Interior minister set up a government school system for me. Okay, so it started in Prussia. took root there. This Robert Owen also set up what was described later by a whistleblower as a secret society. Modeled on the Carbonari of Europe, there was two main goals of this society: to get men elected to the legislature who would support a government takeover of education, and to shift public opinion in favor of a government takeover of education. Now, this whistleblower, Orestes Brownson, he came to Christ and he repented of this evil and he wrote a book about this crazy plan. You can get it today. He said the great object was to get rid of Christianity. Are we surprised? Okay. Then Horace Mann, he loved this idea from Prussia, implemented it in Massachusetts with support from the legislature. He became the first ever state Secretary of Education for any state. He was in Massachusetts, and he imported the Prussian system. He wanted to get the Bible out of the schools. He wanted to equalize all men using the government education system, and he wanted to promote this nationwide, and he ended up doing that. Right away, the quackery started coming into the government schools. They started teaching the teachers phrenology, right? This crazy idea that the shape and size of your skull determines who you are and your personality. They brought in the whole word method of teaching reading, which ended up being an absolute disaster. Within a couple years, all the schoolmasters in Boston said, hey, kids can't learn to read that way. That's silly. We're not going to do it anymore. So they took it out. They wrote a brilliant essay on why it didn't work, and we didn't hear about it again for 50 years. Okay? The whole story of that is actually in the book Crimes of the Educators. Now, Karl Marx was another one of these guys, big believer in government takeover of education. Okay? He actually wrote, in the Principles of Communism, education of all children, from the moment they can get by without their moms, should be in state institutions. So fast forward 50 years, and you get to John Dewey. Now, anybody with an education degree in America, oh yeah, he's the founding father of our system. And in fairness, I think Robert Owen and Horace Mann deserve some of the blame. But John Dewey was a socialist. Maybe you can call him a communist. He actually went to the Soviet Union and loved what they were doing. He wrote these essays about it. He celebrated the collectivistic mentality that they were instilling in all the children in the Soviet schools. Even in 1898, this essay was so important we republished it in the back of the book. It was called The Primary Education Fetish. And he basically argued that we spend all this time teaching kids how to read, write, do math. At the younger years especially, that's not what they need. What they really need is to become part of the collective. They need to be socialized so that they understand that the greater good is more important than them. But he did say change must come gradually. To force it unduly, he said, would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. This is the language of a conspirator, right? If parents find out, if teachers find out, if taxpayers find out, they're going to tar and feather us. So do it quietly, okay? Got to do it slowly. Well, he got himself some prestigious positions. He resurrected that whole word quackery I mentioned earlier and had it spread out all across the United States. Long story short, in 1955, Rudolph Flesch blew the whistle. He said, hey guys, the reason kids can't read is because the teaching of reading all over the United States, in all the schools, in all the textbooks, is totally wrong. Flies in the face of all logic and common sense. Very mild criticism, but right on point. Now we have brain scans. Dr. Stanislas Dehaene in France has been scanning the brains of children who've been taught to read using this quackery that John Dewey resurrected. What he found is actual brain damage in the brains of these children. Their brains get wired wrong instead of the normal way of teaching reading, which is through phonics. Okay? And you're probably not surprised at this point to learn that under Common Core, as soon as they're in kindergarten, the children need to start doing whole words. They need to start memorizing sight words. So a great core, and that is why we have millions and millions. Depending on whose data you believe, the federal government says about 50% of American adults are either functionally illiterate or so close to it that we can lump them in together because they read nothing. Okay, that's the federal government's data. Now, John Dewey was also a very religious man. He had a plan, and his plan was to use the school system to promote his religion. Okay? Now, what was his religion? Fortunately, he left a huge trail of his writing, so we know just what he believed. He wrote the Humanist Manifesto, him and 33 others. And the very first tenet, this is a direct quote, they said, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. It's a pretty profound statement. It's also a total and complete contradiction of the very first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created. Okay? Right off the bat, they're telling you where they're coming from. Now, even if you're not a Bible-believing Christian, I think you should be, but even if you're not, there are very significant implications to this. Right? Our founding fathers said it was a self-evident truth that all men are created equal. It wasn't a debatable thing. Anybody with eyes can see that we were created equally and that God gave us rights. But if you believe John Dewey's religion, you weren't created, there is no God, and therefore you have no God-given rights. You have whatever privileges we decide to give you. Okay, that's the implications. Now, his colleagues, one of the other guys who signed this document, C.F. Potter, said education is going to become the most powerful ally of humanism. Every public school will be a school of humanism. What is a theistic Sunday school going to do 1 hour a week with only part of the children against a 5-day program of humanistic teachings? And the answer, of course, is nothing. Okay? In 1962, the Supreme Court formalized this takeover, and it had been in the works for decades, but they formalized it. They said no more prayer in school in 1962. By 1963, we couldn't even have the Bible in school anymore. Okay. They said the First Amendment requires this. If you've read the First Amendment, you know that's ridiculous. Okay, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. My school board is not Congress. My state is not Congress. In fact, when the First Amendment was written and ratified, most of the states had established churches. So clearly, that's not what they intended. But be that as it may, the Supreme Court actually did exactly what Congress was prohibited from doing, according to one of the justices on the Supreme Court. Justice Potter Stewart, he said this refusal to permit religious exercises is not the realization of a state of neutrality, but rather the establishment of a religion of secularism. Okay? Now they're going for global indoctrination. The UN is taking over. Kimberly touched on this. If we had more time, I'd get into more detail. But in 1990, they passed a treaty saying the UN should decide the basic learning content required by all human beings. We need global standards that the UN will decide on. In 2000, they got another global agreement on education. They said we need changes in attitudes, values, and behavior, and that the schools would bring this about. Here's the Secretary General of the UN in 2015 talking about his view on the purpose of education.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
All right, how many people sent their kids to school to be global citizens? Yeah, none. Right, okay. And you know, I'm a citizen of heaven first, citizen of America second. I have no interest in being a world citizen. Thank you so much. Now, the Global Action Plan, they came up with this in 2016. They again reiterated this thing. We got to get the children trained in spirituality. Okay, and we're going to come back to that. They've got, you know, all kinds of tools. Here's a video they produced where they're bragging about the global education takeover.
The Education 2030 Agenda is our roadmap to inclusive and quality education for all. UNESCO, the UN specialized agency for education, is leading the global and regional coordination of this ambitious goal, responding to cutting-edge global challenges, supporting countries to build better education systems, and monitoring progress to make sure the world stays on course.
Helping countries build better education systems and monitoring progress to make sure the world stays on course. But like that's just in third world countries, right? Not here. I wish. Okay, Obama's education secretary, and I've got like 10 videos of him meeting with them, bragging about this. He says that UNESCO is the global partner of the U.S. government in this global education reform. He quoted a communist terrorist. I won't tell you which one because we need another presentation. But he said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. He said it's a global public good without national boundaries. And that brings me to the World Core Curriculum. Okay. The UN developed what they call the World Core Curriculum. They said it should be taught in every school on planet Earth. It was developed by this guy here, Robert Mueller. Total wackadoodle. He said the UN was the body of Christ. True story. Okay, and if you're a Christian, you know that is blasphemy of the highest order. Unbelievable, these standards. But what really jumped out to me, and you can read these on UNESCO's website, but what really jumped out to me, and you can get a copy of the teacher's manual at your local library, right there in the foreword, Robert Mueller says that the underlying philosophy upon which it's based can be found in the teachings set forth in the books of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Djwal Khul. And I mentioned Alice Bailey earlier. She's a bigwig in UN circles. She actually designed their little prayer room in the basement of that monstrosity on the East River. So who's Alice Bailey? Well, I'll give you a fun fact, a little hint. She was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. Right? They've changed the name now. Now it's the Lucius Trust because Lucifer Publishing, but just a little too obvious. Now, this Tibetan teacher, Djwal Khul, turns out he's not Tibetan, he's not a teacher, he's actually not even a human being. Alice Bailey claimed to be in communication with these spiritual entities. She described them as ascended masters. Djwal Khul was the chief among them. If you've read your Bible, you know they're not ascended masters, they're demons, okay? But she would write these books, that they would actually write them through her, is what she said. And one of the books that helped model these UN standards was called Education in the New Age. And you can also go get this at your local library. Here's a fun quote. World citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened. Does that sound like the UN Secretary General or what? It says, with a world federation and a world brain, which kind of takes on a whole new meaning in the context of the Great Reset and microchips in your skull and Google and all the rest of it,
said our problem is to attain the kind of overall synthesis that Marxism and neo-scholasticism provide for their followers, but to get this by the freely chosen cooperative methods advocated by John Dewey. It's right in the book that inspired the World Core curriculum. Okay, now, Bill Gates, you guys know he put $2 billion of his own money into Common Core. What a lot of people don't know is that in 2004, he went over to UNESCO headquarters and signed an agreement with the UN's Education Agency. Phyllis Schlafly got a copy and posted it on the internet. And they agreed that they were going to have global standards, global curricula, global technology programs, and global teacher training programs. And then Microsoft and UNESCO would collaborate to make it happen. Well, fast forward a few years, and Bill Gates brings you Common Core. And here are the Common Core people bragging about what they're doing.
To tell how well kids are doing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. Is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as a graduate in Shanghai?
Shanghai.
It turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. The standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too.
They match up against international standards. You got Seattle, Chicago, Shanghai, and Paris. All the future slaves will learn the same garbage. Same rules. Everyone will be on the same staircase. Yep. Isn't that cute? They're bragging about it, folks. It's not me telling you that Common Core is aligning our education system with the global standards. It's them bragging about it, okay? Now, this brings us back to the polling data. Most young Americans today are socialists or communists, okay? Most young Americans today are not Christians anymore. Not even self-described Christians. That's where we're going. And so now we get to the last piece. Everything I showed you up until this point is a fact. I brought you the videos so you could see them. I showed you screenshots of the documents. Anything I told you, you can fact check, you can read the documents yourself. Now I'm going to give you just a couple minutes of my opinion. Then I'll give you the only opinion that actually matters. That's God's. And then we'll wrap it up. So we have some questions we need to ask here. Obviously we have a problem. If you didn't think we had a problem, you wouldn't be here. Okay? So the first question, can we reform this system? Can we make it better and turn it around? Well, I wish I had a better answer for you, but unfortunately my answer is a solid no. As I see it now, we've got two options. I mean, we've been trying to reform the system for 50 years. I submit to you that go bang your head against that wall. You'll have much more luck, and it'll be less painful. Okay. So as I see it now, we've got two options. We can get our children out in massive numbers as quickly as we possibly can, or you can prepare for that little new world order they were promising you with this new spirituality and with no freedom and all the rest of it. That'll be fun. Okay, and that's how I see it. So we need a Dunkirk operation. Back in World War II, the British military was completely surrounded at Dunkirk. National Socialists were about to annihilate them. And the British people got on their knees and they prayed and they said, oh my goodness, if we lose our army, we're done. Okay? So they prayed and then they got every resource in their society and put it at the disposal of this rescue operation. Anything that could float went across the English Channel, picked up as many boys as would fit on those ships, and they brought them home and they lived to fight another day. And guess what? They're not speaking German today in the British Isles. Praise God. Okay, they may be speaking Arabic soon, but we'll save that talk for another day. So we need this kind of mindset now. There's plenty of resources in the body of Christ to get our children out. If our ancestors 3,000 years ago, goat herders, could educate their own children, nobody can tell me that in the richest society in human history, we can't afford to educate our own children. Okay, it doesn't take $20,000. Anybody can do it. I think at this point the message is probably self-evident. Parents, if you have children in the government education system, you've got to get them out. There's no way to have them there safely. You will. You're like playing Russian roulette, right? Except there's like 5 bullets in the chambers instead of 1. Okay? The odds are you will lose your children. I'm on the advisory board of the Nehemiah Institute. They've been studying worldview for decades. They found that 80 to 90% of Christian children from Christian homes who go through 12 years of government indoctrination will abandon the faith and leave their church. Okay, that's not a risk you want to take as a parent. They'll also hate you, by the way, and they'll hate your country, and they'll hate your church, and they'll hate the Constitution. And so parents, you got to get your kids out. Grandparents, you need to encourage your children. You need to even offer to help. Right? Maybe you can take the kids one day a week. Maybe you can help with tuition for private school. Everybody can do something. We got to get the kids out. Pastors, priests, rabbis, you need to be sounding the alarm about this. Right? If God called you to be a shepherd, you need to be protecting the flock.
especially the most vulnerable members of the flock. And I sympathize. I know you don't want to alienate and upset the 2 public school teachers in your congregation. I know, but guess what? They already know everything I just told you. In many cases, they know it's even worse than I just told you. They're probably wondering why you're not saying anything. Okay? I've talked to public school teachers all across the country. They are nearly unanimous in their understanding that this is not a good place for kids. That's why public school teachers are far more likely than an average American to homeschool or send their kids to private school. Really good news. The public school system is losing children like crazy. Since the COVID pandemic started, there are some districts that have lost 15 to 20% of their victims. So we can praise God for that. Incredible things happening. And when I started telling people 5 years ago that they needed to get their children out of these brainwash camps, like, Alex, that's really fringe. You need to kind of soften the message, but people aren't going to go for that. I mean, even people who are on our side, like Phyllis Schlafly, God bless her, may she rest in peace, wonderful lady. She had me on her show a bunch of times to talk about education. I said, Phyllis, we need to get the kids out. Oh, well, we got to do what we can to fix it. Well, 5 years have passed, and now it is becoming accepted common wisdom, common knowledge that we got to get the kids out. Rush Limbaugh, biggest talk radio host in America, 18 million listeners daily. May he rest in peace also. In the last year of his life, he called at least 3 times that I know of for parents to get their children out of these brainwash centers. Okay, that's good news. Franklin Graham, the closest thing evangelicals have to a pope in America, right? He said, after New Jersey passed this crazy LGBT law, parents, you got to get your children out of the public schools. Even President Trump said he said it multiple times, we've got to protect our children from these failing government schools. Okay? And so now, what does God say? What we need to ask some questions on what is education really for? Who should be in charge? And who should be in charge? Right, not Caesar, okay? So the Bible says, go to Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he's old, he won't depart from it. He's not talking to Caesar, he's talking to parents. Deuteronomy, you shall teach these laws to your children whenever Caesar doesn't have them. You guys are like, no. All the time, right? When you wake up, when you're sitting, when you're walking, when you're eating, when you're going to bed, you should always be teaching your children, not just when Caesar doesn't have them. Okay, fathers, you should not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the fear and instruction of the Lord. Now, the Bible actually says in the Gospels twice, Jesus says, either you're with me or you're against me. Okay, in 1950s, you might have been able to maybe say, okay, yeah, the public schools are kind of with Christ because they read the Bible and say prayers. What about now? Would anybody say the public schools are with Christ? You can't even mention Christ. They'd rather you come in with headlights or something, right? And the Bible teaches in Proverbs twice, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Okay, Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And we can't even mention the Lord in public schools. Do you think your children are going to get wisdom or knowledge there? The answer is obviously no. If you believe the Bible is true, you cannot also believe that your children are going to get wisdom or knowledge at school. It's just that simple. Okay, so what happens if you don't have knowledge? Well, Hosea tells us, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Okay, that's what happens. Now, Martin Luther, for you Protestants out there, any school that isn't diligently teaching the Holy Scriptures will lead them to the great gates of hell. Okay, for Catholics out there, Pope Pius XI, any education that doesn't have Christ at the center is false and full of error. Okay, so I don't care where on the Christian spectrum you fall, guys, the options are narrowing, right? Harvard was a good school one time, believe it or not. Back in the 1600s. And they said, true story, and their original mission statement, let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider that the main end of his life and studies is to what? To be able to make a lot of money, go retire in Florida and drive a BMW. To know God and Jesus Christ. Okay, that was the main purpose of your studies. Today you won't even hear about it. John Milton, the end of our learning is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright. Now, we were blessed to be born in a self-governing country. We are a self-governing people, at least we're supposed to be. That means we have another role for education. We need to teach our children to be self-governing individuals so that we can have a self-governing republic. So, important task. Now, that's not my actual family, it's just a picture of my family, but we're homeschooling there on an island. It's a lot of fun. I can't recommend it highly enough. Great news, the Census Bureau just released 2 weeks ago new data. The number of homeschooling families in America has doubled, more than doubled, since the start of the pandemic. So, excellent news. And we're in really good company, right? People say parents aren't qualified to teach their own kids. Hey, these guys were all primarily homeschooled. And they went on to create the greatest, freest, most prosperous nation in all of human history. We can do it ourselves. The data is amazing. Homeschooling students are running circles around the victims of the government schools. Even on the government's own test, they're in the 80th to 90th percentile. It's true even if their parents don't have a high school diploma. They're better socialized on every metric that we can track. Lots of great private schools out there for those who don't feel called to homeschool, but buyer beware, there are lots of terrible ones that are using Common Core and government school textbooks and teaching your children lies. So do your due diligence. If you want to get involved, we've got a Rescuing Our Children. I don't have any with me, but it's a simple tool you can give to people. It breaks down a lot of what I've discussed today so that people will understand. We started a new ministry, Public School Exit. You can find us at publicschoolexit.com. It's a great group. We want to make sure that there's no parent in America who can't get their children out, and we want to make sure there's no church in America that isn't helping to facilitate this. So we're doing scholarships. We're working with pastors to set up schools or co-ops or scholarship programs. Whatever is needed, we're working on it. Now, be aware, they're coming for our homeschool freedom. They've told us, the UN passed a resolution in 2015 saying we can't have all this unregulated private schools and all these homeschooling. They're not obeying the global standards. This has got to stop. Now in New York, now they want to shut down the Jewish schools, and you guys know the old cliche, right? First they came for the Jews, next they'll be after us. Okay, because they were mad. The yeshivas weren't teaching enough government propaganda. These two geniuses here, they want a presumptive ban on homeschooling. They were going to have a conference last year at Harvard, COVID canceled it, where they were going to propose a total ban on home education. This guy thinks we shouldn't even have parental rights at all. Okay, that's where they're going. And here we are, indoctrinating, dumbing down, but at least we've got our guns. Right? They'll never take my freedom as long as I got my Second Amendment. And you know what? I'm a gun guy too, so don't get me wrong. They'll get my guns from my cold dead hand. But they really don't need our guns, guys. They've got our kids. And if they've got the kids, all the guns in the world will make no difference. What are you going to do when your kids show up at your door to confiscate them? Absolutely nothing. Okay, so our founders, as was said at the beginning, they risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for this great country to pass liberty on to their descendants. All we're asking you to do is make a little sacrifice, right? Drive a little bit older car, a little bit smaller house, one less vacation, get your kids a good education, and we can preserve freedom in this country. And I want to close with a scripture so that nobody misunderstands. This is not just a political battle. It's not even just an educational battle. It is a spiritual battle. I was so happy to hear the representative mention it earlier. This is what we're dealing with, folks. If you didn't figure it out from that whole presentation, we are dealing with a spiritual battle, and Paul spells it out for us in Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's why the person who wrote the World Core Curriculum cited the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company as his inspiration, guys. It's very clear, at least it should be, and that's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless America.